welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm so excited for this conversation today. I'm Jen, and I am here to speak with not only a comics graphic novel artist, but a library worker, a comrade in many ways. And I am so excited to talk about this absolutely beautiful graphic novel. Welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Thank you, Jen. Hi, I'm Katie Fricas. I am a cartoonist, comics editor, and library worker in New York City. And my book is checked out. It is about a gloomy lesbian who works in a library and is trying to write a book, but can't.
Oh my gosh, I love Louise so much. She is like such a joy of a character. Before we get into her and her adventures, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your journey, both in comics and in libraries. In particular, I'm kind of curious about the relationship between the two. Obviously, like they are intertwined, as you kind of see in this book. But yeah, could you tell us a little bit about how you got here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thankful for comics in a way because they've allowed me to discover the library. So I work on my day job at a library, and I started there as a page, and then I moved to the circulation desk. Now I work in programming. So we have authors come and speak, and for years and years, I've just been sort of, you know, very excited to meet people and also wringing my hands, wondering when it's going to be my turn. So this is a lot of what the book is about. I graduated from college about 20 years ago now. I went to college in New Jersey, and that's when I first became interested in comics via kind of comics by women and dykes from like the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so I really dove headfirst into those stories. And that's when I started learning that maybe there was a spot for me in the mix. Before that, I had been sort of ignorant of comics and thought they were mostly based around superheroes. I mean, no offense, but that wasn't really my thing. So underground comics like really opened up my world. Yeah, so I've always just kind of worked to support my cartooning career. Yeah, and that's how I ended up in a library. I love being around librarians. I love being in places that are providing access to information. The particular library where I work is an independent collection. So it's general in the sense that we have books about everything. There's about 300,000 volumes, but there are particular strengths in New York City history, literature, and biography, which happen to be really great subjects that I like to read about. So um, I've always felt that having a day job in a library was like a gift in the sense that I could dip in to research at any time. It was almost like all of the knowledge that I needed potentially was there. So that was a great feeling.
That is really great. And the book really captures, among other things, like the highs and lows of research and like the absolute joy and sort of like foibles of library work. Turning to Louise a little bit, I'm going to have more library questions, but to talk about Louise, oh gosh, I really love her and her just like big, open-hearted, sort of messy, but really lovable approach to like life and everything. I know that this book is semi-autobiographical, and my question is just sort of about like your approach to, um, you know, auto fiction, I guess, if you want to talk it, autographic novel fiction. Like, where do you preserve the truth, and where do you get creative with the truth? Is part of it to like anonymize things, or like what else drives that?
Well, it's interesting because as a library worker and like a library fetishist, I do have this like fanatical drive for to do research, and so it was hard in a sense to understand that I could actually fictionalize parts of the story. I pitched it as sort of an episodic semi-memoir. So this was my first book. I've done a lot of short comics and nonfiction essay comics and just like slice of life kind of zines. But this was my first book, and I feel like I was constantly asking myself, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? And so for a while, I was really concerned with making sure that things were accurate, and then it just didn't end up fitting into the project. It sort of turned into this one long narrative, which was also a surprise because I kind of wanted there to be a beginning, middle, and end, even though the story does meander into kind of Louise's obsessions and her love life. Louise is definitely an avatar for me. I mean, everyone's always pointing out to me, well, my friends are always pointing out to me how Louise has straight hair and I have curly hair. So there's this big difference between us. But I didn't even think of that really. I've always considered her sort of an avatar. But yeah, I changed the order of events. There were certain characters that I based on sort of like mashups of different people I know. I changed most everyone's appearance if they were based on a real person. But there was a lot of picking and choosing around what to keep authentic to real life and what to fictionalize.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds really interesting and complex too when you are approaching a project like that and when you love research, because I've always had that problem of like, as somebody who was a historian at some point, I'm like, this should be as accurate as possible. What do you mean I can break that rule? So
Yes.
hmm. Something else the book captures really well is sort of that feeling of being a 20 something in New York City as you are like in those post-college years when you are sort of figuring yourself out and your path. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about like how you depict New York City and being young in New York City. Among my favorite details is that on a subway scene, you have a Dr. Zizmore ad. And I'm like, ah, yes, that brings me back to.
Yes, it's funny because so I've been in New York City for 20 years, I think I mentioned, which I keep mentioning it because I feel sort of proud of it. But the thing about New York is like, there's this constant debate about what makes you a New Yorker. I know a lot of people feel that you had to have been sort of born and raised here for that. I mean, I think I do have kind of the nostalgia of the everyday New Yorker where you walk by these spots where, maybe they've been chased out by gentrification, the rent's going up, and like corruption around how landlords operate and stuff like that. And, this sensation of missing a place that used to be there. I wanted that to be in the book. There are a bunch of places in the book that actually do still exist in New York City, like this Italian place called Arturo's, which is in the West Village, and some other spots. So it's sort of a mix of places that used to exist that I miss and places that exist that I still like going to. So yeah, it's funny because the Louise character in the book is a considerably a lot younger than me, which, the book itself, I feel like it takes place about 10 years ago. And so yeah, it was almost like my kind of like thank you note to the like super young 20s period of my life in New York City. And I did want to preserve like certain memories that I had, like going to a show to see my friend's band play at like Don Pedro's in Brooklyn, things like that. Yeah, it was sort of a way that I wanted to kind of preserve those memories in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very I was in New York City at that time too in the years and for college and like immediately after that. And I do also miss it a lot. And it's weird to like as you were saying, it's weird to miss a place that's still, like you're still in, but it's different, like yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole, that's a theme in my book. This whole like what is the essence of homesickness? Where can we consider home? And so the character is writing about this homing pigeon that saved a battalion of troops in World War One. And she's also the kid of like somebody who served in the military, so spent her childhood kind of not having a hometown. So those themes are explored in the book. And yeah, it is a new sensation for me to be watching things change. This is the longest I've ever lived anywhere. And so yeah, it's kind of funny that that comes up in a way because it's actually not something I'm used to. Yeah.
Yeah, wow, that is really interesting. I'm glad that you brought up homing pigeons because I am really interested in that facet of the story. Cher Ami, what a fascinating little thing in from history. And something you capture so well is like I think I mentioned before, like the highs and lows of research and how, the entire world can just sort of like fall away while you are really caught up in a project like that.
Yeah. Well, isn't that wonderful? I mean, Yeah. I mean, there's this part in the book where the character says that like books are ghosts and she feels their protection around her. And like, I- that's really something that I feel there's like a different atmosphere when you walk into kind of a stack of books. You do feel this sort of hum in the air, and it's intoxicating, And I mean, I guess the character went through sort of a parallel struggle that I did as a cartoonist, in the sense that I was doing some nonfiction comics. I did some art critiques and reviews for this website, Hyperallergic, and then I did some like political comics for The Guardian. And I started feeling nervous, that I wasn't a properly trained journalist, or am I doing it wrong? I had this like major imposter syndrome about it. And then in the end, I didn't really like critiquing other artists. So I kind of like decided to move on to this book project. But in the book, Louise is also having this feeling like, does she qualify as a historian? When does your hobby cross over into your occupation? Like, what kind of confidence do you need to achieve that or to bridge that?
Cool. Yeah, I think it's really interesting the way that like the art reflects sort of, I feel like the journey. And this ties into, I think, both the depiction of like New York City and your 20s and doing research of that, just that like I mean, how do I say this? Like you have the really expressive, colorful characters on backgrounds that kind of range between really detailed and then kind of simplified. And it sort of recreates that feeling of like floating through space, floating through life, floating through a research project.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like part of my inspiration comes from this like sense of just desperately wanting to do something and not being sure if I can achieve it. So the art style is sort of juvenile. I've heard that um as an adjective that describes it, or there's something about it that looks like loose and fast, and that it's sort of like and I've heard that the narrative is kind of like this fever dream that like jumps through time. And all of that was just completely necessary because it felt like the only way that I could do it. I kept asking myself, okay, I don't know how to do this. I've never drawn this before. I've never done a book this long before. And so there were all of these things that I just felt like, let me just turn my brain off and just like get this done, and just keep it wiggly. And I kept having to remind myself, because I am prone to anxiety and depression, like, you're having fun, and I try to like shoot that down from my brain, like through my hand. I mean, quite literally, like envisioning these things as I was drawing. And I think that does come through. I did want there to be joy and humor in the drawings. But yeah, it actually did come from just being like, I don't have time to learn how to do this properly. So we're just going to work it out.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I really like that. And that suits Louise's journey. I feel like, yeah, that's really great. Oh, yeah, I really enjoyed just I don't know, I don't know how to say it, just like the vibe and how like it is so easy just to like get really absorbed in her story without really thinking about stuff like structure and I hope this turns out right and it is as complimentary as I mean it to be, but just like that sort of like you are in her stream of consciousness, and you are sort of like among all the other things, like just the joy of her way of thinking. Like,
Yeah, I mean, and that is kind of the way I think too. And that's part of why I do feel like I have to say Louise is an avatar for me, even though I would like to eventually be able to write full fiction, or to actually, or to have nonfiction in other people's voice so that I can take myself out of the picture. I mean, but so I've always found that it's been hard for me to draw comics in square panels. It's hard for me to use a ruler. It's difficult to draw hands. Like, I don't know how to do perspective. And it's like, it's funny because we're on Zoom right now. We can see each other. I see these kids' books, or like what look like skinny kids' books behind you. And it's like, I always find that kids' books are like the best reference for so many things, or they're like such a great jumping off point for getting into your research, because they really simplify things. They're illustrated and a lot of it is very comic like. And so I was very much thinking about kids' books a lot in the design of the book, like this book, Gregory and the Terrible, what is it? Gregory the Terrible Eater. It's this kid's book about a goat who's eating piles of trash. And so there's this part in my book where the character's really depressed because she can't write her book, and so she like flushes herself down the toilet and she goes through the sewer, and I needed some trash to illustrate, so I turned to that book to just kind of boost some trash items like a tin can, and like a fish bone and that kind of stuff. And so yeah, keeping it simple was helpful in getting the big job done.
Nice. Awesome. I'd like to ask a little bit more about the library setting. One of the things that I think you sort of capture spot on is the like the fun and the interest and like the people watching aspect of like acquiring your regulars at the library, like the patrons that you always see. It's almost like being a bartender in some ways,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, totally. I mean, I remember when I would work the circulation desk and we would get new members who would come in, and sometimes they would be disgruntled. I mean, my disgruntlement often runneth over, but sometimes they would come in and we would just be like the target for this, like maybe the 10th annoyance of this person's day, and you would just get it good. But we would always chuckle about it because like the nature of the library is like you have to come back. And so, you're going to be returning your book. And so whether you like it or not, there's going to be a relationship sort of formed with us. It's almost like the relationship with, your postal worker or the workers at your deli downstairs, at least in New York City. I mean, it's kind of like this community relationship. And so, yeah, I also used to waitress, and there is something sort of intimate that happens when you have regulars. Also, I love a good like list. I'm a big list maker. And so the regulars have a sequence in my book where it's like this sequence of regulars, and we kind of just go through them in a list form. Also, Louise goes on a bunch of dates that she meets some babes on some apps with, and that's also in list form. And so yeah, there are little kind of like Easter eggs in the book that might appeal to people who work in libraries, things like that. There's this whole part where Louise gets mad because she sees in the section of books that the librarians have decided to deaccession, get rid of to make space for other books. She's over there driving them nuts. She's not even a librarian. She's pulling books and saying, why are you getting rid of this? And so it was fun to play with that sort of with the sort of like library, um, the library culture.
yeah, absolutely. And your journey as a library worker, because I was really angry about weeding when I first got here too, I'm like, how could you get rid of books, you fascists?
Okay, see, it's a rookie move on my part, and it
Yeah.
was right around the beginning. But I do sort of have a reputation for butting in on the work that the librarians do. I mean, a lot of it is because I'm just a little jealous. I'm always making requests of the acquisitions librarians or pointing out if they don't have a book, or I love to go in and say like, oh, I noticed we had 4 rows of shelves of books on like Churchill. Is that really necessary? And like, they just shoo me away. So, but Louise has that kind of like that like sort of fanaticism, and she does sort of baffle her coworkers a little bit with that kind of behavior, and also with her like sort of niche obsession with this pigeon.
It's such a relatable obsession though, because I had known about this pigeon before this book. I was
Okay.
obsessed, so I have a lot more research to do. Um, oh yeah, it's so lovely. It was such a delight to read, and I'm so excited to share it, not even just with patrons, as I usually do for my job, but just with other library workers. I think it's just such a really great um like glimpse into the life and a celebration of it, like warts and all.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's this triple threat where it's got like there's like a kind of queer thread running through the story because the character's queer, and we see her life and her friends, and we like branch out into the lives of her friends who are also queer artists with day jobs. Then it's got sort of the appeal to anyone who's ever had to write a book or like make a comic before, and how frustrating that can be. And also it's wonderful and like such a privilege, I should say. And then yeah, there's this whole library aspect where, you know, I'm hoping to be making kind of a library circuit as time goes on, and just I'm hoping that, you know, selfishly, that this book allows me to get into a lot of libraries to visit.
We do too. That would be great. And
Yeah.
I forgot to even ask about sort of like the queer community aspects and the making art about making art aspect, because it is like in some ways like a sort of like queer Barry Lyndon too, like with like much cooler, nicer vibes.
Oh goodness. One of my best friends had me watching Barry Lyndon like every day for a couple months. Like another, speaking of, so I have friends who have obsessions too. It's funny you should mention that. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So what is, I know like, graphic novels take forever and you are exhausted after them, but what is on your horizon? Do you have any projects like looming in the future?
I love that. That's so nice. You are exhausted. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I am. Well, it's funny because yeah, I came up through zine culture and through mini comics and, you know, the queer community. And it's funny, I feel like I did all this hustling to get into like these various publications and do all of this stuff. And it's like, I did this book for Drawn and Quarterly and I'm feeling like amazing about it. And it's like, wow, all I want to do next is just make another zine. So I'm going to do that. I have this notebook I've been keeping. It's called The Pleasure Bible. And it's actually this book someone dumped on the library. It was just like a dummy copy of an art book that is just like this huge book, and it was completely empty, and it has this wonderful quality paper. So I stole it because nobody wanted it. And I made it into the Pleasure Bible. So each page is like something I really enjoy. And it's actually kind of a fun sort of like flip through, and it's a bit light. So I'm focusing on that.
Well, Godspeed. That sounds great. And I'm, yeah, very excited to see what's next. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, listeners, please check out Checked Out. It's out now and it will be out when you hear this. And it's just such a good time and such a beautiful work of art. I think you'll really enjoy it. Okay, it's time to close this chapter. I'll see ya.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.